What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition Power Gamers Tactics Room. I'm your host, Bill Brian Bafflestone. So today we're having another episode of my Metagaming series, where I look at Dungeons & Dragons from a more holistic perspective. And today I wanted to talk about DPR and build evaluation. But I wanted to start this out with a joke and an anecdote. So this joke is one of my favorites. I'm an economist, and this is an economics joke, but it really gets to the heart of a lot of my criticisms about economics, and as we'll see, there's some overlap with my criticisms of DPR in build evaluation. So the joke goes like this. A guy comes across an economist who's frantically looking for his keys under a street lamp, because it's nighttime and it's dark out. And this guy is like, "Oh, you dropped your keys, let me help you." And they start looking around under the street lamp for the keys, and they can't find the keys. And so the newcomer says to the economist, "Let's think this through. Are you sure you dropped your keys over here?" And the economist says, "No, actually I dropped my keys way over there." And the newcomer's like, "Then why are we looking for the keys here if you dropped them way over there?" And the economist says, "Well, because here there's light, and it's dark over there." So I think that's hilarious. But let me tell you the anecdote, and then we'll discuss all of this. The anecdote is that when I graduated from college, I started working at this fancy consulting firm. And this is one of those firms that only recruited at like Ivy League colleges and stuff. I went to Columbia. And like every year at each campus, there would be like 16 interview positions open. And we would get hundreds of resumes for each of these interview spots. And so the way they would do it was that they would give all the resumes from Columbia to those of us who had graduated Columbia, and all of the Harvard applications to the Harvard grads, and the Princeton to the Princeton grads, et cetera, et cetera. And so this was just kind of like an extra task kind of dumped on me. You know, I was already working like 70, 80-hour weeks on like my 2 cases a week, and now I've got to evaluate like 300 resumes and pick, you know, my favorite 16. And as you go through, like, you try to do it right? You go in with all of these, you know, I'm going to like really fully evaluate these resumes and get a sense of who this person is and try and pick the very best one. But there's just so many. You can't do it. And then it's complicated by the fact that most people don't know how to write a resume, and so they just all look the same and nobody's distinguishing themselves. And so what you end up doing, and I talked to my colleagues, they ended up doing it too, you just start looking at the GPA, right? It's just like this filter. It's like simple. It's something measurable that you can look at, and it's like, okay, I'm going to take out like all the 3.9 GPAs, and okay, there's like 30 of them. 30 is still a lot. You know, there was 270 that were 3.8s or below, although typically 3.6 was like the minimum. But there, you know, only like 10% of them were 3.9s. And then out of that 30, it was still hard to, you know, evaluate or whatever. Even using that GPA as a filtering metric. And so that brings it all back around to DPR and build evaluation. I have started putting the DPR columns in my builds, where I compare it to a baseline of agonizing blast plus hex hitting 60% of the time. And I save it for last. I realized like the first time I did it, I did all of them first, or like as I was going. And then I made like one little change to the sheet, and then I had to like recalculate everything, and it was so annoying. So I realized, okay, I should leave that for the end. And during my last build, I was wrapping everything up, and I started going through, and I started doing all the DPR calculations. And it just was starting to get on my nerves, because DPR is such a flawed metric. It's what's visible. It's what we can see. And so it's very easy to be like the economist in my joke, where you're just going to look at that thing that you can see, because it's hard to evaluate builds. I mean, when I'm putting these builds together, DPR is literally the last thing on my mind. I mean, I just know that I understand how to construct a character enough that the DPR is gonna be fine. And, you know, so when I do the calculations, it's like, okay, look, wow, I'm 1.5 times baseline. I'm 2.5 times baseline. I'm 5 times baseline. I knew that was going to happen. I just, didn't realize exactly the magnitude of it. When I'm putting a build together, I'm looking at like so much more than that. I'm looking at like action clog. How are we going to do round 1, round 2? What's going to be our action, our bonus action? I'm looking at how you stack synergies and whether there are redundancies, and how quickly does this build come online? How playable is it? Does it have anything that it can do outside of the combat phase? Can it do anything within the combat phase that is a little bit more clever than just racking up DPR? Like, for example, I was really proud of the combo that was kind of like the centerpiece of my Blade Grappler build, which was he would use his tentacle to attack, which would trigger a bonus action grapple attack. And then once grappled, he could drag them over so that the enemy was adjacent to another enemy. And then he could use the Reaper version of Sapping Sting to prone them both, so that his opponent was grappled and prone, and an additional enemy was also prone to help out an ally, something that a Battle Master requires a superiority die to accomplish versus 1 creature. And here we are doing it versus 2 creatures with a cantrip, right? Over and over and over. See, that's the sort of stuff that gets my attention and that I am pleased with and denotes a strong build to me. But what's the DPR of that move? Right? Well, gosh, Sapping Sting does a D4 per tier level. So that's the DPR of it. And yet it put me into such a great advantage, or, a great position, an advantageous position, that it has a massive impact on the battle. Yet it has low DPR, right? I mean, what's the DPR of a hypnotic pattern? You wipe 60% of the enemies off the board, no matter how many hit points they have on round 1. What's the DPR of that, right? And then these figures get so granular, right? Like if you look at my DPR boxes, there's like 5 or 6 things in there, because you've got to start with, your base DPR, and then maybe you add a Booming Blade Rider, and then maybe you add Sneak Attack, and then maybe you add Giant Smite, and then maybe you've got a Fire Shield going. It's just, you have to add all of these things up for each individual strike. And then someone in the comments was like, are you accounting for the fact that you're casting Blur on round 1 and you're only attacking, rounds 2 through 6? I think this other guy takes that stuff into consideration. No, he doesn't. No one can. Why should I do that when the fighter may have had to dash just to get into position? He loses a round, right? I mean, maybe that round that I don't attack, I'm casting a Fireball or, a Force Cage. Right? I mean, it's just like, as soon as you start diving in to what DPR numbers actually represent, you realize they don't represent much. And so this obsession with DPR is understandable, right? The joke and the anecdote makes sense, because you can only see where there's light, and you have to use certain filtering metrics when you are dealing with hundreds of resumes, and there are hundreds of builds out there. So do you really want to watch a 30-minute video of mine, or a 45-minute video of mine where I meticulously break down every level and add, the spells and add the feats and add all of the abilities, and I show you how it doesn't cause clog? Because that's pretty granular. That's how I evaluate builds, and I think that's how one should evaluate builds. But that takes some time. That's an investment. It's a lot easier to say, well, this build has 79 DPR, and this one has 77 DPR, so this one with 79 DPR is better. I mean, that's not true. We'd have to look at all of the other stuff, but it's simplistic, and therefore it is somewhat useful. And so I'm not here to bash DPR entirely. I do put that column in my character sheets because it's useful. It is a useful metric, but it is one metric. It's a metric that really has relevance to martials, but not to spellcasters at all. I did that Bladesinger and Shepherd Druid build, and the Shepherd Druid column, his DPR never got above 5 or 6. And yet he is destroying people with life berries and conjure animals and all of this other stuff. So how do you compare a DPR build to that? You can't. You have to evaluate these builds in their entirety, in their total synergy, their total elegance, their total impact on all phases of the game, right? The interaction phase, the exploration phase, those count too. And so, yeah, I guess I'll wrap this up. I mean, I don't want this to turn into a giant screed, but I think it's worth thinking about and having an interesting discussion about how you evaluate builds, right? Do you leap right to that DPR? And, if so, how much credence do you give it? I personally don't look at it at all. I know that my intrinsic understanding of character construction is going to result in a sufficient, if not impressive, DPR without it being like a specific thing that I worry about. But everybody's different, and I do builds in a different way. I would love to start a discussion and hear about how you evaluate builds, how you think about DPR, how important DPR is to you, how you like to calculate it. Do you try and take into account like the fact that there's like 5 different rounds and you might have like 8 battles in a day, and so you can only have like a max level slot Shadow Blade in the first battle, and then the second battle is like your second highest Shadow Blade, and then after that you have to use your third highest Shadow Blade, and then we're gonna amalgamate them all and then take an average. I mean, as a consultant, I used to slice up numbers in a bajillion different ways, and they're all valid. And they all usually contribute to the narrative that you prefer to believe. That's the great, lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? So, in any case, thank you so much for watching. This has been the Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition Power Gamers Tactics Room. I'm your host, Bill Braun Bafflestone. See you next time.